Hi guys, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So recently I did a video about single-edged versus double-edged swords, and there were 2 points that came up in that I want to sort of clarify or add a bit to. The first thing is an important point, that is that single-edged swords, and here is just one example, single-edged swords such as sabres, backswords, falchions, very, very rarely don't have some degree of what we call false edge. That is, they are usually edged up at the top here. Okay, and all sorts of swords. If I just pull another random one off the wall here, let's take this one. Okay, even ones with less pronounced false edges do tend to have a false edge, and I hope you can see in the light that this is essentially a backsword blade. Okay, so it has a thick flat spine along the blade here, and then for the last about 10 inches of blade it's edged on the back. Okay, so this is actually double edged up here. This is a kind of extreme example. This is the so-called Wilkinson type blade that came along in 1845, or was, shall we say, refined in 1845, to really maximise the cutting and thrusting potential of a sword whilst retaining stiffness in the thrust as well. I won't go too much into that because I'll talk probably more about that in an upcoming video. But the point is that very few single-edged swords, or what we call single-edged swords, are entirely single-edged. Now some of them are, a famous example of course being the katana or the wakizashi. Thank you very much for those of you who contributed saying that there are certain types of Japanese sword which do in fact have a false edge or in fact are double-edged. That's certainly very true, and there were some very interesting examples given. However, the majority, of course, of katanas and tashi and wakizashi and tanto are single-edged and don't have any kind of false edge and are not at all double-edged. There are, of course, other types of sword which are truly single-edged. Most types of Arabic shamshir, for example, tend not to have any false edge. But then lots of other swords which people probably think of as single-edged, for example, the Turkish kiliç has a false edge, a very prominent false edge, and in actual fact this first sword I showed you, almost certainly this is a Prosser. Prosser is a maker of swords in the early 19th century. This is a Prosser example, and he was quite well known for this very pronounced, what's sometimes known as a quill point, but raised yeoman or false edge. The yeoman being Turkish word for it, and this was almost certainly inspired by the Turkish kiliç, and you know, that is a very famous example of a false edge. But equally many tulwars have false edges, sometimes prominent like that and sometimes not prominent, but they're still there, they're still sharpened just around the back there. Now primarily, and of course I should also mention messers, most famously German Langmesser or Grossmesser, generally speaking, have a clipped point or at least are sharpened on, even if they're straight at the back, are usually sharpened for some region of the back edge. Now it's interesting, the reasons for this seem to be varied. Yes, you can cut with the back edge, so even with where I mentioned before about an advantage of a two-edged sword over a single-edged sword is that you can cut with the back edge, but in actual fact many single-edged swords are edged up here, and this is the region of course that you cut with. So in actual fact most single-edged swords that have a false edge, you can cut with them with the back edge just as well as you can with the front edge, or just as well as you can with a two-edged sword. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is about thrusting. Okay, so a number of you quite correctly pointed out, a lot of you questioned, is there some advantage to having a false edge or a two-edged blade? And let's be frank about it, for that part of the sword upwards this is essentially a double-edged blade, even if from that point downwards it's a single-edged blade. Is there an advantage to having a double-edged blade if that's the portion of your blade going into an opponent's body? And the simple answer is yes. Now, I haven't done a huge amount of research into this, and I haven't really done a huge amount of testing. I have thrust into various targets with both single and double-edged blades, and both of them go in absolutely fine. However, there does seem to be some evidence that single-edged blades are more likely to get stuck in certain things and are harder to extract. Now clearly, when you, and I've spoken about this many times in previous videos, when you run a blade into someone, whether it's a knife or a sword, or in fact a bayonet, it's just as important to be able to get that blade back out again, because if that blade becomes stuck in the opponent, you're essentially disarmed, okay? And you can therefore be a very easy target for your next opponent. And there is some evidence from the First World War, and unfortunately I can't provide a citation because I read this many years ago and I've since forgotten which book I read it in, but there was some evidence, and some of the viewers may be able to give more information on this, that single-edged bayonets in World War I were found to be more likely to get stuck in an opponent's body. And that's one of the reasons why after World War I, if you notice after 1918, there was a kind of spate of new bayonet designs coming out, particularly with shorter blades, so they ran less deeply into the body, but also with clipped points and double-edged blades. And this perhaps was a way of trying to get over the problem of bayonet blades getting stuck in opponents' bodies. So there we go, two main points really about the single-edged versus double-edged kind of topic. One, that most single-edged swords in the world across history have actually had some degree of false edge, I would say. Or at least, if not most of them, then a good proportion of so-called single-edged swords actually have a false edge up at the tip here, okay, much like a Bowie knife. And secondly, that yes, almost certainly, that false edge or edge at the back of an otherwise single-edged sword is not only for cutting, but may well in fact be to make thrusts either more effective at penetration or more consistent at being able to draw them out of the target again afterwards. Thank you.